We ready?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Nikia Phoenix podcast, specifically Reclaiming with Jo and Nikia. Hey, we're back. We've got a special guest here, Latishia James, affectionately referred to as, known as Reverend Pleasure, the program director for Move to End Violence. She's a Black queer femme, womanist, writer, facilitator of healing spaces for BIPOC women, femmes, and LGBTQIA folks, and sacral spirituality coach. Okay, I am so excited to have you. I'm so thankful to have you to get into it. Like, we're not going to waste any time because with intros and all of that, because we've got some work to do. We have so many things to talk about. So let's dig in. Tell us about your work with the organization Move to End Violence.
Yes, so excited to be here with y'all. So Move to End Violence, MEV, has been a program of the Nova Foundation for the last 12 years. And it started as like an innovation hub. Lab of sorts that brought together activists and leaders on the front lines in the movements to end violence against women, girls, and gender expansive people to ask them, what is it that you need, like really need, to sustain your work and also to sustain yourselves? Because so often the people doing this work are also deeply impacted by it, right? You have a lot of survivor advocates who are advocating. You have a lot of multiply oppressed peoples who are the same ones fighting for liberation. And so when we look at that and we look at the ways that trauma impacts us as people doing this work, you have to stop and think like, it's not surprising sometimes that some of the same things that we're working to end get duplicated within our movements. Right? Because we're all swimming in the same waters of white supremacy and violence and patriarchy and capitalism and all the things. And so it's like, yes, we're trying to end it, but we're still in it. And so it's in us, whether we want it to be or not. And so MEV followed a cohort model. And we ended up with 5 cohorts in total, ranging at about 15 to 20 people per cohort, each cohort lasting anywhere from 18 months to 2 years. And in that time, they were given grant support, they were given professional development support, organizational and leadership development support, access to healing justice and spirit care work in various forms, whether it be through practitioners, through activations that we did. They were also given support in the form of peer support, of being able to connect with people who are also doing this work, who are also survivors, who are also working to dismantle these systems, so that they could break down the silos that, you know, philanthropy and white supremacy and the nonprofit industrial complex had created when it comes to social justice work. Because for so long, so many of us were fighting for the same pots of money. Right, and fighting each other, kind of like people talk about the crabs in the barrel mentality. But our co-director, Monica Dennis, always asks the question, you know, people always focus on the crabs in the barrel, but why aren't we talking about who created the barrel in the first place? Right. And so part of that conversation is really in bringing folks together. What does collaboration look like? What does shared leadership look like? How do we dismantle these habits of white supremacy in our activism so that we are actually creating spaces and environments of healing rather than duplicating the harm that we have experienced? So it's been a beautiful 12 years. I've gotten to be a part of it for the last 3.5. We are sunsetting because we were not meant to last forever. And so it's a bittersweet to say goodbye, but also we know that the legacy of the work will carry on. My colleagues and I, who've been a part of the transition team, have been working on some gifts to the movement, some resources and toolkits that will be published soon. And so I'll definitely share those with y'all, but we think that it'll be really helpful for folks who are continuing this work in various ways, right? As as we say in various moments, la lucha sigue, right? The fight continues and goes on. And so, we know that legacy of MEV will live on.
Oof. First of all, thank you for your work. Thank you for your work. We often, when we started doing this podcast and talking about resources, like we did our own digging. We were able to find, there are so many organizations, but I don't always hear like what goes on behind the scenes of those organizations to make sure that they're there to support us, that they have the support that they need. And when you said that, white supremacy, the crabs in the barrel, like all of that, it's the container, the barrel itself that keeps us limited in the resources that that are available. It's like, oh yeah, because look at who this affects.
Mm-hmm.
When we were doing all the research, it was like, oh, so this disproportionately affects us.
Mostly people of color.
And it's tiring. We're
It is.
It's tiring.
It's extremely exhausting.
Because when we post all of these things about, okay, how can we end gun violence? How can we end intimate partner violence? Like, what can we do to better support women? What can we do to better support, like, these communities that need the help? It's like, I mean, the problem stares us right in the face. It's like white supremacy, patriarchy. Patriarchy.
It's true.
Like, oh gosh. And the most recent acts of violence that have happened in the US in the past like couple weeks alone. Oh my goodness. It's like, it's disheartening.
Yeah, it's disheartening, but unfortunately not surprising, right? Because when we talk about the root causes, when we talk about white supremacy, we talk about patriarchy and capitalism, colonialism, and all of these things, it's not surprising that you get this culture of violence, right? I think people want to think that when you see these individuals acting alone, right? This idea of this like lone wolf gunman or, these singular people who are committing acts of violence. And it's like, no, this is a part of a breeding ground of a system that imbued these people with the confidence to carry out these acts of violence. Right? And so, I mean, look no further than the storming of the Capitol, right? That was not a lone person. That was a strategically planned event, right? And it came as a result of violence going unchecked for so long, right? The U.S. is built on a history of violence. And so this idea that, gun violence and, it's a gun issue. It's not a gun issue, right? It's like, yes, sure, guns should not be so accessible in this country. It's ridiculous how accessible getting a weapon is in this country. And people who are carrying out these acts of violence are not doing so simply because they have a gun. They're doing so because they're targeting specific groups, because of rhetoric that has been spewed by politicians, by people, by media, by various folks, because of the culture that we're in. I talk about often my political home is reproductive justice, the reproductive justice movement. And I talk about often the ways that intimate partner violence is inextricably linked with state violence. Because if you live somewhere where the state can say, I don't care that you are a survivor of sexual violence. You do not have the right to access an abortion. Well, how is that different than being in an intimate partnership where your partner is denying you access to contraception?
Wow.
As a form of abuse? Tell me the difference.
Oh.
And so the idea that somehow we're going to stop and end intimate partner violence without also ending the violence that happens on a state level, it's erroneous. They go hand in hand. And, you know, reproductive justice is an inherently intersectional framework. And I tell people all the time, like, all of these things are inextricably linked. When you're looking at multiply oppressed people, when you're looking at reasons why, for example, a Black trans woman won't leave her abusive partner. Well, she lives in a country that is denying her access to basic human rights. And so if she's in an abusive partnership with her own country and can't get what she needs, how much harder might it be for her to leave an intimate partner situation where perhaps financially she's reliant on this person or things like that and can't get access to other things because it's easier to stay so that she can get her basic needs met than to leave an abusive situation because federally she can't get access to her basic needs and her basic care. Right? And so it's like, it's more than disheartening. It's infuriating, and it also it's systematic and it's systemic. And you know, I can never talk about one without talking about the other. I can never just talk about intimate partner violence without talking about state violence, because they go hand in hand for me.
Yes. Oh. Ooh, I gotta let that sink in.
Yeah, literally, I got chills because it makes complete sense, and I love the way that you broke it down too.
That was a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was the way that you laid that out, the correlations. Like when we do not have authority over our own bodies. I've heard you say this in another interview. When we don't have autonomy over our bodies, it's such a challenge. We feel, gonna speak for self, I felt like there's nowhere for me to go, that I'm not supported, that I can't make decisions for myself, and that I'm not even experienced enough or knowledgeable enough to make decisions for myself, because those are all the messages that society continues to feed me from being a Black woman in America, from the things that my ancestors have experienced, from even uncomfortable situations. Oh gosh, I had an abortion when I was 19. That was one of the most heartbreaking situations for me. And I felt like I had to ask for other people's permission to do what I knew I needed to do. So I'm visiting South Carolina right now, and South Carolina has, gone back to these archaic laws about what I can and cannot do with my body. Florida has archaic laws about what people can and cannot do with their bodies. Georgia, and I know, so everything that you said really, really resonates. And I didn't tell myself I wasn't going to cry on this podcast. So
We literally just said that to each other.
We did.
This is going to be the one. I'm going to cry. And I cry real ugly. So the video part of it is going to...
It's okay.
What?
We said all the feels, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's the feels.
all the feels.
Because you can't. It like you said, it's disheartening. But it's angering. It's you have to grieve. Like you have to mourn, because it's nonsensical when you think about it. Mm-hmm. That particularly when you think about like the history of Black and Indigenous and Native folks in this country, right? The so-called United States, that the way our bodies have been subjugated and just violated, and broken down for the benefit of someone else. And now supposedly we're supposed to believe that we have progressed. And yet here we are still fighting for very similar things. It might look different, right? Because we have access to certain things, right? But access does not equal liberation necessarily.
I earlier this year, my daughter and I went on the march for abortion rights, and we had our signs up, and she was marching because I wanted for her to know, what was going on, because it's her body too. She's 12 years old, and if anything happens, God forbid, she should have also rights in her own body. And as we're marching, we pass this elderly woman who has her sign who says, "I can't believe that I'm still protesting with the same shit." Like. Mm-hmm. And she asked to take a picture with my Zen, and so I'm like, this is it's wild still.
How do we? It's I don't believe it's not up to us to fix this. It's not. I don't believe it's up to us to fix this. This is not. We didn't create this problem.
We didn't. And unfortunately, it is one of those, it is a situation where it literally is going to take all of us. Mm-hmm. And what it's going to take is the people who have the most privilege and the most power to recognize the ways that these systems of oppression actually harm them too. Right? They think that they're on top, but it's like, if you're on top of a sinking ship, are you really on top? Like, are you really winning? How is it helping you? And so, Sonia Renee Taylor, brilliantly, she always talks about body terrorism, and she talks about the ladder of bodily hierarchy. And she did this video a little over a year ago now, when, in I think the last couple of years, there's been a resurgence, rightfully so, of conversations around colorism. And so she did this conversation, this video where she's talking about the ladder of bodily hierarchy. And this one was specifically talking about colorism, but she was talking about all types of ways that bodies are put in a hierarchy, right? Whether it's skin color, whether it's ability, whether it's race, whether it's gender expression or gender identity, right? Whatever it might be. And when we're thinking about dismantling systems of oppression, right? She talks of this, using this metaphor of the ladder. She talks about that if you, from the rung that you're on, right? This metaphorical rung that you're on, really take the time to assess, okay, who is below, who is above, based on society standards, right? Not necessarily based on what you're saying, but based on what society is telling you, where you rank and who else ranks wherever. If we start to dismantle the rungs, right, the ladder can't stand. And so what's happening is that more and more people, I think, who are quote unquote lower on the rung by society standards are calling things out and working to dismantle oppression. And you have the people at the top who are like working so hard to keep it in place. And so it's starting to look like stilts. It's starting to look like these like stilts, and it's toppling. It's not sturdy, because we can't survive this way, right? One of the things that my biggest lessons as a survivor and on my healing journey has been around communal care. And I'm grateful for the conversations that have come out of COVID around this, because people have really kind of been hit upside the head with the idea that like, oh, right, we actually cannot survive and thrive in this culture of individualism that has been created by capitalism and white supremacy. Survivors know this firsthand, right? Oftentimes, the reason why survivors are able to get out of abusive situations is because of community, is because of all of the things that they're able to put in place with their safety plan and their team, right? Like, it takes time and it takes building, and it's like, okay, got my plan, I got my trusted people, and you know, and now I feel safe enough to get out. It's kind of the same thing with these systems of oppression. It's like we are trying to build our safety teams and our community teams and mutual aid and mutual care and hubs. And it's why you have things like, what are they calling it now? The Great Resignation, or whatever buzzword they're using now. More and more people are like, oh no, these systems are bullshit. And they don't actually benefit anyone. Not even the people who thought they really benefited them, right? People on top. And right now, like, you have billionaires, of course, who are still benefiting and not caring about the well-being of others. But the more and more, I think, of us who are not a part of that upper echelon, right, that are coming together, and really leaning into these practices of communal care, I think the more we will see shifts, and we have been seeing shifts, and we'll continue to.
Communal care, that having that support system, having the people that you love and trust have your back, so that you don't feel alone, because as we know, an abuser wants to make sure that you feel helpless, that you feel alone. I think coming from a Black community, and yes, I'm biased, but that, because of the oppression that we've experienced for generations, we do understand that importance of community. Mm-hmm. That importance of, hey, I got you. I got your back. Like, even if you fall, I'm going to help pick you up. And as I look over at my altar with my ancestors, mm-hmm. just reminded of the bonds that we have that continue to strengthen us.
Mm. Ashe.
Let's talk about, there's something that Jo and I have been talking about recently as we've been telling our stories, and, you know, we start to feel different things in our bodies. We start to feel the trauma in our bodies. And I know that I often feel this, my hips are, every morning I wake up and my hips are like, they're so tight. And I know, like, okay, sacral chakra, let me,
yep.
I need to
work it out.
I need to work it out. Okay, girl, what is this telling you? Like, what is the pain telling you? When my chest starts to ache, it's like, okay, you know, the heart chakra, like, all right, what is this telling you? And I start to either do tapping or like massage my chest, like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
The tension that I can often feel in my back um, when I'm having a flashback to being in, curled up in a ball trying to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like stretch. You don't have to curl up anymore. Um, what's been your experience working with body trauma?
Yeah. I love this question. So I'm a very embodied person. So part of how Reverend Pleasure came to be is that in, let's say, like in the 20 teens, sounds funny to say. Yeah, I'm like, how do I say this? I would talk a lot about, when I was in grad school, I would talk a lot about trauma and shame and, all of these different things. And I remember I was having a conversation one time with someone, and she was like, trauma's like your jam. And I was like, no. I don't know that I want trauma to be my jam. I said healing trauma is my jam. And the way that I heal trauma is through pleasure. And so that person would end up becoming a friend and coworker. We worked on a sex startup together called O School. And my name on the platform was Reverend Pleasure because I had been just finished seminary. A lot of my work was around sexuality and spirituality. And I was constantly talking about like body. So I'm a dancer, do yoga, and I'm going to feel, my body is going to tell me something before anything else tells me something. My body always knows. Always. I don't always listen to her, but she always knows. And so it started on my healing journey. So I'm a survivor of sexual violence in addition to intimate partner violence. And actually one of the things that helped me on my healing journey as a survivor of sexual violence was self-pleasure, was masturbation, was me actually reclaiming my body, right? We talked about bodily autonomy, and it was me actually like getting back into my body and being like, no, this body belongs to me. Because after the second act of violence, there were parts of my body that were literally numb, that I couldn't feel. And I remember trying to be with partners consensually, and they would like touch me in certain places, and I'd be like, nothing. Like my body would not respond. And so I really had to just take a break, take some time with myself, and be on this solo journey of reconnecting to my body. And so I actually teach this workshop called Pleasure After Trauma. And it's all about ways of reconnecting to your body and reconnecting to your pleasure after trauma, whether that trauma be sexual violence or physical violence or what have you, but just things that you can do, moves that you can make. And so whether it be taking a bubble bath, whether it be something as simple as like starting with when you're drinking your water, right? Feel the cup in your hands. How does it feel when you take a sip? How does it feel when the water goes down your throat? Like literally meditating on feeling these movements within your body. Like how does it feel when you rub your fingertips together? And what is that pleasurable sensation that you derive from that? And that's where it started for me. And so a lot of I used to do a lot of direct service work before I was on this side of things, and working with survivors. And so helping them to get back into their bodies, teaching workshops, doing yoga. I used to do dance classes for survivors, just around like, what does it feel like? A lot of like theater of the oppressed too, of just like movement. And what you said about the hips, spot on. I too have to, right, continuously, because I think healing is not a destination, right? It's not linear, it's a journey. And so even though I've been on my own healing journey for many, many years, I too still wake up with tight hips. I have to do my hip stretches, my hip openers all the time. And recently, actually, within the last few months, I started doing my hip openers at my altar, at my ancestral altar, because I recognize that not all of the trauma stored in my hips is mine.
That part. That part.
Right? It's not all mine. And because I started to get frustrated with myself sometimes a little bit, where I was like, oh, I've done so much work. Why do my hips still hurt? Why do I still feel this way? What is going on? I have all these things. I have fibroids. I have all this stuff. And I'm just like, what is happening? And I got to this place of realization, unfortunately, because there was trauma that happened in my family not too long ago. And I was like, wow. Every woman in my maternal line has experienced some type of intimate partner violence.
Same.
Starting with the earliest person that I know is my great-great-grandmother, Roberta John, who was violated by some Irish man. We call him the Irish devil in my family. In St. Vincent, and she got pregnant with my great grandmother. She was 15 when she got pregnant, when she was impregnated. And so just knowing that, like, the recent memory of my matrilineal line, like, that's what it starts with. So we're carrying that in our line, right? And then from there, my great-grandmother Gwendolyn experienced intimate violence. My grandmother experienced. My mother, me, right? My aunts, my cousins. And I was like, okay, this is not all mine. And so how do I start to heal generationally, not just individually? Right? And this is when we're coming back to communal care. And it's opened up conversations, right, that I've gotten to have with family members. Unfortunately, my grandmother and my mother are no longer physically here. So I talked to them at my altar, and it's part of why I started doing my stretches in front of my altar, so that I could commune with them and so that I could talk to them. And also, frankly, so that I could be like, hey, y'all got to take some of this back. Take it somewhere else. Because it can't live here. It can't live in this body anymore. And it's been hard work. It's been deep work. There was a day I woke up and I just felt it. I just felt the grief in my body, and I was like, okay, girl, I just laid on my mat. I started doing my stretches, and I literally just wept for like an hour while I did these hip openers, just weeping. And I could tell it wasn't all mine and that it needed to come out. And the parts that were mine, I honored it and I acknowledged it. And I continue to do that, but body movement is so important as part of our healing journey. Whatever you can do, right? I know not everybody physically has the capability. And so whatever it might look like for you, to get into your body, you mentioned tapping earlier, right? Tapping, there are other energetic Reiki, somatics, just other things, something to move the energy out of your body. I believe in holistic care. I believe when we talk about holding things in our body, it's been proven over and over again, right? That when we hold certain energies in our body, it manifests physically, right? Like that chronic jaw that you might have, right? That's not necessarily because something's wrong, right? Inside, like physically, medically. That could be because of all the tension that you're holding, right? All the energy that you're holding. Likewise, when we're talking about womb space, and, I know it can get a little dicey. People will be like, oh, don't say things like that. We don't know what causes fibroids. I get that. And we know that energy and spirit and these things are real, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence that so many Black people with uteruses have fibroids.
And I'll tap into that endometriosis, which is something that I have. I actually had a terrible flare up this last week and barely could move out of bed. And as you're talking about this, I think about that. Yeah, like the generational things. Like mine is an all body pain. I can't move out of bed. I physically need assistance to even use the restroom at times. And then when you mentioned like the trauma manifesting, I told this to Nikia what was it? I think it was in September. I went to bed, I woke up and I was missing a dollar size worth of hair right here. Literally overnight. I had a full head of hair right here. It was on my two sides and it was gone, completely gone. I couldn't even see a stubble, like no hair follicles or nothing. I was just like, oh my God. And I go to the doctor and it's like, yeah, you have stress. Alopecia from stress.
From stress, yeah.
And then I think about what I was going through at the time. I was like, yeah, I was getting stuff about my court hearing, about my abuser. And it didn't happen gradually. It was just like, bam, bam.
Yeah.
That the hair loss, the
the jaw. From the tension of the jaw, it caused me a lot of acne in my face. Like it is like your stress and their trauma really does manifest physically. It's incredible.
It does. It does. Yeah. It's why I get angry sometimes when people try to like write Black folks off as just like unhealthy people. Because they're like, because we have higher rates of diabetes and hypertension and heart disease. I was like, yes, we were also systematically traumatized for generations. So where do you think some of that comes from? It didn't just appear out of nowhere. It isn't just because of the food that we're eating. Like, no, right? Hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, all of those things are associated with chronic stress.
Yes.
I'm on a fertility journey right now, and I went for my fertility checkup. My A1C was a little elevated. She was like, we're gonna have to work on getting that down before we can like proceed. And I was like, okay, cool. She sent me to a nutritionist and all these things. And nutrition was like, after I told her like what I eat, my routine, all these things, she's like, I don't think your A1C is elevated because of your weight or because of this or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I know. I was like, well, tell me about your life. What's going on? Da, da, da. She was like, oh, you're stressed.
I've been seeing a chiropractor for months, and on one of my last sessions, that I was like, "Is this all just?" And she said, "Yes, it's stress.
Stress is real." I did not know this girl had hands like she does. Because honestly, she don't beat my ass this year.
It is, Yeah, I think it gets written off as like this very frivolous thing, and it gets overused. It's like, oh, you're stressed. And it's like, no, but stress is actually very serious. When we're talking about like chronic stress, and that is what multiply oppressed people go through we are under chronic stress, right? From state-sanctioned violence, police violence, from not having access to care. Now the federal government wants to further take away, bodily autonomy rights for people with uteruses and for trans people and LGBTQ people. There's another shooting every other week. There's social media stuff, right? And that's all before we get to what's happening in our interpersonal lives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this idea that it's like random, that we have these conditions, or that it's hard to function, or that it's harder to have longer attention spans, or things of that nature, it's ludicrous, right? It's like these things have very real consequences. And so we're talking about like things like manifest in our bodies, and it's part of why I do my work as a sacral spirituality coach, because so many of the messages we receive are inextricably linked to our spiritual realities as well, right? We're talking about particularly Black women and Black folks, and the Black church has played a very large role in how we see ourselves and in how we move through space. And unfortunately, the majority of Black religions have not been untouched by colonization, which means they have not been untouched by patriarchy. And I have seen and experienced people in the church encouraging women to stay in abusive relationships. Right? I have seen the ways that this mentality of, oh, well, you know, we all got our crosses to bear, and you just gotta, you know, God wouldn't give you more than you could bear.
What?
Literally systemically encouraging people to endure chronically physically stressful situations, and then they wonder why Black women are so burnt out and so tired and need, you know, are like giving up in ways, and why we have such high rates of so many of these illnesses, when it's like culturally and systemically we're constantly being made to be somebody else's scapegoat and to endure in whatever way, whatever new way has been invented, right, of the day.
Yeah. Growing up in a Black Baptist church, absolutely. Our pastor he had this thing about women not crossing their legs in church. Like if you're going to cross at your ankles, not
at your ankles. Yeah.
And even I was a debutante. Even being a debutante, it was like, no, we cross at our ankles, not at
our ankles.
And like, what? There's so many things that we were taught, but the why was not explained. And then it's also like you're putting the responsibility on the victim, the recipient of the unwanted attention, instead of actually educating and stopping the predators.
And it's no different in the Latino culture. It's the same for us as well. Like, especially, you know, Catholic Church. That's a big one. But I actually have a friend of mine who went through the same thing. She was, you know, very devout to the church, and they did that to her. She was a victim as well. And it was always like, stand by your man, you know, this and that, the other. You know, we frown upon divorce in the Catholic community. So it does make you feel like you're stuck. And like, who is defending us? We're supposed to go to church to seek, you know, some sort of asylum and, you know, help. We pray to God in the safe space, but in actuality, like, is it that safe?
No. The short answer is no, unfortunately. You know, so prior to going to seminary, I was actually on my way to get my master's in public health. And I'm sure you've heard this probably turn of phrase in the church of I heard a call, right? My call to ministry. My call to ministry was because I was working at an HIV/AIDS organization for women and girls. And I was the youth program manager, and I kept having young women coming into my program with one of two things happening. One, they were survivors, and They did not have anyone else to disclose to. And they thought that they were now worthless because of messages that they received in their church about virginity and purity and all of these different things, right? So now they're being violated twice, right? They were already violated. And now, furthermore, they have all this shame weighing them down because this place that is supposed to be this safe haven and this place that they look up to, these people they look up to, have given them messages that now make them believe that they are outside of God's love, that they are irredeemable, they're worthless because something outside of their control happened to them. And then two, I was encountering young people who were queer and engaging in really risky behaviors because, quote, if they used condoms, then it would make it real. And if it made it real, then it would be a sin. And in both of those situations, they were sharing, unbeknownst to them, my story. And it was heartbreaking. And I was like, I can't. This is too much. And around that time, I had actually come out to my father's side of the family, and it had not gone well, and I had been disowned. And I was like, you know what? Cool. And I had this dream, and literally I was like, I'm not going to get my master's of public health. I'm going to seminary because if God hates us so much, then she needs to tell me to my face. I was like, I'm going to go to school so I can learn all these things for myself, and we can just put this to bed once and for all. Let's just go figure it out. Let's just go. And I did. And within like the first semester of seminary, I learned that everything I had been taught, nothing negoso, basically. And I was like, oh, okay. So what are we doing? What are we teaching out here in the world? You know, when you learn things like the fact that the book of Genesis was put together by multiple priests and written by multiple authors, and then some priests in a room decided what would get put in and what wouldn't get put in particular canons, you're kind of like, okay, right? And also when you learn the sociocultural context that, oh, who were priests in those days? Well, wealthy people who had access to education, who could read. So now, right, you're the narrowing of who could even earn the honor of being an author and deciding on what books would become what we now know as the Bible. Right? This very narrow slice of society. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like things that are, right? Patriarchy, yay!
You know, and also how the Bible really got us set up. Women, we are set all the way up, okay?
Yeah. It is. And so this is what's getting used to keep people in their place. And this like continuous way of just this idea that like you have to suffer to earn something. And we see it still today, right? In churches and a lot of other religious spaces, but especially in Christianity, this idea that, oh, you have to earn your worthiness. You have to earn your like salvation. And it's like, no. If you read your own text and what you say,
who already did all of that?
Jesus already did this. So wait a minute. Why? What are you talking about? Right? And it's heartbreaking and it was angering for me, but it was also very freeing to go to seminary and to have that experience and to really learn things for myself and to continue on this path. And so it's how Reverend Pleasure came about. It's why I am so passionate on, you'll never hear me talk about these things without talking about religion and spirituality, because I know how much it influences a lot of people's decisions around particular things, right? Because divorce, is frowned upon, and it's like, no, I have to stay because my soulmate. There's a divorce coach on Instagram. I'm blanking on her name right now, but she put up a post recently that talked about, like, if you were raised in the church and you were raised to believe that marriage is a covenant and not a contract, and that if you get divorced, that you are damaging your soul instead of just breaking a contract, right? Yeah, you're probably going to stay in a toxic situation or in a situation, right, that you shouldn't be in, because you have really taken in this message and this belief that marriage as a covenant. And so if you break that covenant, then you're damaging your soul. You're putting your relationship with God in jeopardy.
Same thing with getting an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hell because
like they use this fear factor situation.
Oh yeah, shame. They love it. They love shame. They love it so much. It's how it keeps them in business. Because I say, for me, shame is the ultimate sin, because it disconnects you from yourself, from your community, and from your divinity. And once that happens, you're going to stay exactly where you're at. How do you get out of someplace like that when you're not connected to yourself? You're no longer connected to your spiritual grounding, and you're no longer connected to community. That's part of what kept me in situations way longer than I should have been.
Guilty. Yeah. Most definitely. It was a lot of shame, because, like, my mom consistently asked me, like, why did you stay in there so long? Why did you? It was a lot of, like, I didn't want to break up my family. I didn't want my daughter to, my abuser wasn't my daughter's father, but he was father figure to her. And I'm like, I don't want to leave and then introduce another person into her life. Yeah, it was that shameful. And also didn't want to let anyone know that I was being abused, just the getting out of it. Then I would have to explain to everybody I was being abused. And that was shameful.
Yeah.
Allowing all of this to sink in. And we've talked about this before, Jo, that shame that's not our shame.
Yes, it is not our shame.
With my abuser, there was definitely a lot of religious and spiritual shame. And I'd hear it from him. I'd hear it from his mother, from his father. And I was just like, wow, okay, so we would have these debates about, like, am I really going to hell because of this? And every time I was like, everything that they're saying is just to suppress me. Everything that they're saying is to justify their treatment towards me. And with my abuser, I was like, you're treating me the exact same way that your dad treats your mother. It's got to stop.
It really does. I mean, I remember one of the really bad times that my abuser had beat me up. His sister was present, and that's when I found out that his father used to abuse his mother. She started yelling out, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Remember that, dad did this to mom, blah, blah, blah." And then I'm like, oh, well, damn. Oh, so this is something that's just been carrying on, something that you've seen. It's the cycle. This is how you view women.
So when we're talking about that ancestral work, like, okay, so we're able to see that this person that is abusing us has experienced or witnessed abuse. However, I don't know how many times I heard my abuser saying, I don't want to be like my father. Or other family members in my family that were abusive saying, I don't want to be like my father.
Mm-hmm.
And me saying to myself and saying to my ancestors, this stops here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This stops here. Had a shouting match. Well, it was one-sided with with some ancestors a few weeks ago, and I was like, this, like you said before, this pain that I've been carrying, this is not all mine.
No, it's not.
My response to certain things it's inherited. This is within my DNA. Yet I have the power to heal all of this by the work that I'm doing right now, so that this gets washed out of my DNA completely.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's so important to talk about this, about that often people who commit acts of violence, who are abusive, have either been abused or witnessed abuse, right? And that's not an excuse for what they do. However, it is a wake-up call of that this is a cycle. It's ingrained, right? Abusive situations that I have been in, the person on the other side always was a person who had either been abused or who had witnessed abuse. And we have to think about the ways that this gets built into our cultures, right? So starting with childhood, starting with how do you discipline your children, right? What is your idea of discipline? I was having a conversation with my sister recently, and I was like, one of the reasons I had delayed children is because I didn't want to do to them what was done to me. And I was terrified of I would have a kid and that I would become physically abusive towards them, because that was the type of discipline that I had experienced. And I was like, I do not. And so I've done a lot of work in therapy and various things, but also because that's the way that I was disciplined as a child, and that was what was ingrained to me, that was okay, that it was okay for someone to handle my body in that way. When I got into a relationship and my partner was abusive towards me, it didn't actually faze me at first. Because subconsciously, I thought I deserved it. Subconsciously, that's how you handle these things. When you're acting up, right? And so bell hooks, rest in power, talked about this so poignantly. I know we talked about crying earlier. This is the part that's probably going to make me cry. I will never forget reading Bell Hooks All About Love for the first time, and her talking about love and abuse not being able to coexist. And she was talking about it not in the context of an intimate relationship, she was talking about in the context of parent-child relationships. And I had to put the book down. Because I was like, Mama Hooks, I think what you're trying to tell me is that my daddy don't love me. I was like, I don't know what to do with all of this information. This is a lot. And it was really hard to come to terms with. And to this day, even in therapy sessions, my therapist, my most recent therapist, literally finally got me to a place of being like, okay, maybe you don't have to call it abusive. Right? Because I struggle with it. But they were like, could you get to a place, though, of recognizing that there was abusive behavior that should not have happened? And I said yes, right? Because me being able to release and acknowledge that actually really freed me up from resentment that I had towards myself and towards an ex of mine because there was some violence that happened early on in our relationship. And I was that understanding partner where I was like, okay, you were abused. I get why this happened, right? Because I work in the field, so I can do all the things, right? Logically, I'm like, I know why this happened. I see all the things. I see the signs. We're going to go to therapy. You're going to get help, da, 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 right? But the part of me that was like, but girl, why are you staying? What is happening? What is the part of you that thinks that this is okay? Yes, you can have empathy for them, but it doesn't mean you have to stay. And it was that child part of me that was like, oh, well, no, it's okay because they still love me, but, you know, sometimes that's how love gets shown, right? And trying to do all of the machinations and all of the things, right? You have to have the level of cognitive dissonance that I think sometimes we as survivors have to survive and to like get through a thing is wild, and it can be crazy making and all of the things. And so generational healing has been so critical for me, but also inner child healing has been so critical for me to see that like, oh, there is no part of Latishia, big, middle, or little, that deserve to be handled in that way by anybody. Right? Whether they were my parent or not, no one deserves to handle my body in that way because my body belongs to me. Which was a very hard place to get to.
Yeah. That that part of the discipline that a parent gives you, and you're right, we've been taught to disassociate the actions from the words and the intentions. And hearing a parent say, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you.
Child.
And having those same emotions when an abuser hurts you. And I remember hearing my parents' voice saying, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, and feeling empathy for my abuser when the inner child me needed the empathy and the protection.
And I felt it completely when you were just saying that. I that's why I started tearing up, because it's true. It's like I didn't react too much in the first few times when my abuser would slap me or pull my hair, because he always told me I was bad, you know, so this is my discipline. And, you know, just kind of like when you're little, you know, you're bad, you get a whooping or something. And, you know, me coming from like a mom's point of view, every time I would see my daughter, if she did misbehave or, you know, whatever little thing, I couldn't even bear. I'm like looking at her, I'm looking at me. I'm so much bigger than you. You're so much smaller than me. And, you know, I'm shameful to say that there's been, I mean, I can count the handful, the times that Zen has gotten a spanking, but I cried every single time. I wept. It was, and unfortunately, shamefully to say, my abuser was like, you need to discipline her physically so that she knows blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I can talk to my daughter, you know? And I mean, my daughter, not because she's my daughter, but she's an intelligent young lady that she can understand. And they do. If you sit down and you talk to your child and you explain to them, it's a lot better. And then your relationship and your communication style with your child gets so much stronger. You know, Zen doesn't fear me. She feels comfortable to come up to me and to tell me things. Kind of like when, you know, she came out to me, you know, like she was able to feel comfortable to come to me with that information, you know? And I love that.
Yeah. And that's the part, that fear part, right? Like, you shouldn't fear people you love, or you shouldn't fear people who say they love you, right? Like, if I'm afraid of you, something's awry here. Like, something has gone amiss. And again, this is why it always too goes back to religion for me, because people would talk about, the fear of God. You got to put the fear of God in them, and da 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 da. And I'm like, again, why should I be afraid of my creator? This is the person you say has created me, loves me, all of these things, and I should be fearful? And this is, I can get into a whole biblical literacy thing, but this is where, like, interpretation is important, right? Because it's not actually fear the way we think of fear. It's reverence. It's awe. It's like, like wonderment, amazement. Yes, those are feelings you should have for somebody you love and who says love you. I'm in awe of you. I'm in awe of the person you are. Like, I revere you. I honor you. But like fear, trembling,
and
no.
And every time that is exactly what it's, that fear of God, fear of, and you're right, the interpretation, how different people interpret that word in the Bible when it comes to God has it has really, really intentionally messed up generations of people, messed up generations of women, but I believe it was intentional.
Oh yeah, they want to keep us under their foot.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
when we're talking about love and all that we had been shown about love and taught about love, this sphere of love, and these dichotomies of do what I do as I say, not as I
do.
and even still loving someone when they've wronged you, when they've hurt you. We've received a lot of mixed messages about ourselves, about our bodies, and we gotta reclaim self.
Yes.
And that's why these conversations are so incredibly important, because just sitting here right now, I am just like absorbing everything. And I'm so thankful for both of you to be here and just dropping these gems, because like I mentioned many times, I'm just recently getting out of mine, and everything to me is like, oh, okay, that's why. And it's helping me to put the pieces together so that I can form a new self, a new version of Jomati, a more prepared version, and something that I can pass off to my daughter so that we don't continue to, pass on this generational trauma.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that you have some resources that you can share, that you can pass on, because when we started off and our mission for this podcast to tell our stories, to let others know that they're not alone, and to offer tools. So if you have, and when I say tools, obviously resources, and then because of the work that you do, things that we can do, like to honor ourselves and honor our bodies to facilitate the healing process.
Yeah. So definitely some, I'll share some organizations here, but I'll also like follow up, and maybe y'all can put them in the notes and things, because there are so many. But I want to definitely lift up Black Women's Blueprint as an organization. They actually did a really amazing truth and reconciliation process with survivors a couple of years ago. And this is something that, is gaining more traction, particularly in our communities, because we know that firsthand that the police system is not made for us. And that a lot of times, for various reasons, right, we don't want to call the police when abuse happens or when violence happens in our communities. And that sometimes we feel like, again, this like dichotomy of things, right? Like for me, for example, I never pressed charges against any of the people who raped me. I was really young, but also like never really wanted to. But a part of me like had this shame of, right, of not wanting to put another Black man, right, in prison, right? Like that messaging, that idea. And so I'm grateful for Black women's places like Black Women's Blueprint. I'm grateful for people like Miriam Kaba, who have been championing work around transformative justice and restorative justice, to really center what does survivor justice really look like when we don't involve like police systems and these systems that don't actually bring us justice and liberation. And it's something that I hold on to. It's at the bottom of my email is a Bell Hooks quote that talks about knowing that, believing in people's capacity to be transformed, right? Like, so being in touch with their humanity enough to acknowledge their wrongdoing, hold them accountable, yes, but believing in their capacity to be transformed. And that does not mean that you have to stay in relationship with them. I want to make that very clear. They can transform, and we can hold space and grace and belief that they can transform, but it doesn't mean that we have to continue to be a part of their lives in that process, right? We can heal. You can't heal in the place that you were harmed, right? And so we can hold that space while also healing. And so that's actually one of the tools, one of the first things I'll say. It's something that took me a long time to learn, because deeply empathic person, deeply codependent person, recovering people pleaser, healing from all of those things. And so I stayed, right, because that idea of like, oh, well, we can heal together, or we can figure something out together, right? But no, right? Healing doesn't occur in isolation, but it can't occur in the place where the harm has happened. And that's how resentment builds. Right? Resentment towards the person and resentment towards yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? I had a lot of resentment towards myself for saying what I shouldn't have. And then later feeling like I was owed something because I stayed. Right? And then when I didn't get the thing that I thought I was owed, resentment came. Right? And all these things. And that's another thing that can't coexist with love. Resentment and love cannot coexist. And so I think that's a gift that I'm giving to myself, that I'm offering to others, right? Is give yourself the space and the grace you need to work through your resentments, and to give yourself the space and grace to forgive yourself. I've had to do a lot of forgiving of younger Latishia, right? We did the best we could with what we had when we had it. But, and so just like working to forgive myself, honoring my younger self, right? For the wisdoms that I did have. And that's definitely a big tool that I've used, a lot of affirmation of the different parts of myself. So I've been writing affirmations since 2013, and I started them after coming out to my family and being disowned and not going well. And I just needed to affirm myself. I needed to remind myself that I am loved, of who I am, and all these things. So affirmations is a really big tool. It is a little inactive at the moment, but I'll plug my affirmations Instagram. It's at Purposeful Affirmations on Instagram.
You shared some of your root chakra affirmations for to end violence, and
I did.
It's really been resonating with me.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yes, so I did create a root chakra affirmation for root chakra meditation for survivors, and so yeah, I'd be happy to share that out as well. And I would just say the final, not final, but I think one of the things I'll leave y'all with around tools is sharing your story, sharing what you're going through with your people, right? Find your trusted people. And be honest about what's happening, because a lot of times we keep things inside because we think we're going to be judged and because of shame, right? And all these different things. And sometimes that could happen, right? And if that does happen, then you know that that person shouldn't be in your life. There's that. Right? Release them. But for the people who like you trust and who are in your corner and those things, what it helped me do each and every time was it held up a mirror and reminded me of like how loved I am and how worthy I am and what I'm worthy of. And gave my people an opportunity to show up for me, right? Your people want to show up for you. They do. They love you. They want to show up for you. And you just need to give them the opportunity to show up for you sometimes. Because people don't know how to help if they don't know that you need it.
You have literally said all of the things that I've been reading and all of my books. I watched a documentary with a therapist and I was like, oh, okay, yes. And everything that you're saying, just, it's right here. It's right here. And I feel it through my entire spirit. So grateful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
Oh goodness. Anything? Is there anything you need to touch on before? Because all hearts and minds. How are we doing? How are we doing? How are we doing? How are we feeling?
I know personally, I feel like Latishia said things that I haven't been able to even put into words. Being silenced for so long, I felt like I'm even relearning vocabulary because I wasn't allowed to do certain things. Just hearing you and the way that you're explaining and you're saying things, it's just like, yeah, you're explaining what's in here that I haven't been able to say out loud. And I literally, I feel it like all through my body as if it's like coming out of my pores at this point after this conversation. Thank you. Really, it's special. It was really special.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's when you've been doing this work for so long, sometimes it's like you get jaded, different things, burnt out, and I've experienced all of those, like the highs and lows. And I've identified for a survivor advocate for a while, but I don't share as much of my stories, particularly when I'm doing like direct service work, because I don't want to engage in like any transference or like project any of like my stuff onto the people that I work with. And so I'm appreciative and thankful when y'all invited me onto the podcast. It gave me an opportunity to reflect on my experiences and to really sit and decide what it is I wanted to share and what I wanted to say about my own lessons and my own healing journey. And, there are some things that I'm still healing from. There are some things that like I have not been as vocal about. There are some things I'm still figuring out how to talk about. Particularly as a queer person, I feel so protective of my community because we already have so many things against us. And so I never want to feel like I'm giving people one more thing to use against queer people. And so I had to like really sit and decide, like, what am I going to share? How, what am I reflecting on? And so I was thankful because I really realized that it actually doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter. That's not what I want to say. What's most important about what I share is me and how I've come through things and my lessons and what I've learned. And that I could do that without feeling like I needed to disparage or do other things or like do over explain situations, right? And just name that like there's a reason Kimberly Crenshaw coined intersectionality. There's a reason we need to be intersectional in these conversations, because for many of us, Black and brown folks, Indigenous folks, the people who we are in relationship with are other Black and brown and Indigenous and queer and trans folks who are also experiencing the same systems of oppression that we are experiencing. And so when harm occurs between us, it is devastating on many levels, because we care for each other so much and we know, right? We know what's happening in the outside world to us already. And so then to have to figure out how to move forward internally and interpersonally, it can be a lot. It's overwhelming. It's so much. And so I'm grateful that we're having conversations amongst ourselves, right? And like honest conversations and how we're moving forward, because it's important. And I really do believe in transformative justice. And I really do believe that like, I speak for myself, that the harm I've experienced, I don't believe any of those people are bad people. I don't believe I'm a bad person, right? Because I've also enacted harm. And I think a lot of times, because things get so muddled and complicated, you're like, oh, well, I stayed. And so then people want to be like, well, you stayed, so you just as toxic. And, right, like all of these things start happening, right? Because it's like, oh, well, if you fought back, then are you really a survivor? Are you really a victim? Right? All of these levels and layers of things that happen. And so it gave me an opportunity to just reflect on all of that. So thank you for the opportunity for that reflection and to be able, to share from my own experience. I am not an expert by any means. I have not. If there's a code, I don't know it. I don't have access to it. I'm just trying to forgive myself and forgive others, and to show up in growth as much as possible, as much as I can, because I feel like that's all we can do, right? And like, we talked really early on in the beginning about like, how does change happen? And I think change happens like with each one of us as we continue to grow and change and actually like move differently based on the lessons that we've learned.
Ooh. Mm. Ooh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. This was church for me. And this conversation has been a sanctuary for everything that I've experienced. This has been very special. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah. Okay. So where can we find you online to continue the the sharing and the resources and the healing and all of that, we find you?
Yes. So you can find me right now on Instagram at love.Latishia, Latishia. And yeah, you can email me through there as well. I am accepting coaching clients. So feel free to hit me up if you feel like we could be aligned. And I'm going to be going on a self-love sabbatical journey soon. And so I'll be sharing out things on my Instagram from there, and then sharing other ways to stay in touch with me, hopefully through a newsletter that I'll be releasing. So stay tuned for that. And then the affirmations Instagram is purposeful affirmations.
Wow, self-love. Yeah. It all starts there. You know, we are. Oh, yeah.
We're all about that. All right, let me plug in my phone before it dies. Just keep it.
Oh, that's what is
Very
the timer
real.
situation when it starts unlocking.
No, my phone was just like, oh, no. We have reached capacity or battery.
We are at capacity.
Wrap it
up. Y'all been talking too long.
Literally. Like, wait a minute. It's not Mercury retrograde yet. Why are you doing this? Thank you so much for opening up, for sharing. I'm going to ask, because of the work that you do, because of the words, the meditations, the affirmations that you offer, can you close us out with something, whatever you're led to do? Close us out a little.
Yeah. Sure. So let's just take a moment to find a comfortable position. And for anyone under the sound of my voice, just lean into what it feels like to hold yourself. In this world that oftentimes systemically and sometimes interpersonally tells us that we are not worthy of being held in various ways. Lean into what it might feel like for you to hold yourself. You might want to physically do something, wrap your arms around your body. Or it might just look like placing your hands on your thighs or at your side. Or perhaps it's an energetic holding yourself in your mind. Perhaps you imagine laying on a bed of clouds, sitting in your grandma's favorite comfy chair, digging your feet in the sand on the beach. Whatever it is for you, bring it to mind. Know that you are loved. Know that you are safe. Know that you are held, as my mentor Gina Breedlove says, by the womb that held the womb that held the womb that held the womb that held you. You are never alone. And if you are currently in a situation that is harmful, may you feel safe. May you be free from harm and danger. May you release any shame. May you seek the help that you so deserve. May you find peace. For anyone who has recently left a situation that was harmful, you are loved. You are cared for. We are so proud of you. Your journey is just beginning. You have so much life ahead of you. For anyone who is far removed, perhaps, from a harmful situation, and who sometimes still has doubts, sometimes has flashbacks, sometimes the shame still creeps in, you are loved. You are cared for. We are so proud of you. You're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great. For anyone who knows someone in a harmful situation, don't stop showing up for them. Keep letting them know you're there. Keep letting them know you love them. They need you, even if they're not ready to tell you yet. Just keep showing up. I promise you they appreciate it. For all of us, Black folks, brown folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, queer folks, trans folks, for all of us folks deeply impacted by this white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society, we are doing the best we can. Let us continue to be gentle with ourselves and with one another. The journey, the path, the fight towards liberation requires us to be tender with each other, to love each other as deeply as we can. Let us not repeat the harm that we experience on one another. And if we do, let us be accountable swiftly, make amends, and learn and move forward as gently as we can. We're all we got. Let us seal this prayer with 3 deep breaths. And come back when you're ready. Ashe. Amen. Aso. Thank you.
Right on. And on that note, thank you for tuning in to Reclaiming with Jo Nikia, with our special guest, Reverend Pleasure. Thank you. See you next time. Be kind to yourselves.